Chapter 5 The Debate Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. Joe Marsh silenced his phone and returned to scanning the packed auditorium. He prided himself on being able to judge a person's background in a single look. Many were college kids, glued to their phones or flirting with neighbors, some with faculty, reading or grading in their seats, or in more than one case, discreetly snoozing. The ones who really needed a haircut he assumed to be online journalists. There were some nerds, perhaps science researchers from Georgetown or other universities in the area. And then there was a balding, exhausted middle-aged man who looked slightly sheepish, as though he were an FBI agent returning from having downed 4 measures of scotch in the auditorium bathroom. "Hey, Andy, grab a seat. They're about to start." They were close enough friends that Andy Valchek didn't always bother with the Mentos, but in this crowded room it would have been too risky. One of the perks of being an agent, they had both found, was that there was no need to wear a uniform or badge. Like police officers, their identities and responsibilities were under wraps. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice began, "please be courteous to others and silence all electronic devices." Valchek found his phone, switched it to silent mode, and decided not to take notes. Valchek hated looking like one of the geeky, perky students around them, but at least it would have given him something to do. Marsh worried that his partner would become bored and restless after no more than 20 minutes. Unless the presenter was scorching hot. One of Georgetown's alumni, now a science advisor to the White House, explained the simple format of the debate and then made the introductions. "We are honored to have with us today Professor Hiroshi Takagawa from the University of Kyoto and Dr. Philip Marks from Cambridge University in England. They will be debating a question which has been much in the news recently. Should we place restrictions on the development of artificial intelligence?" Valchek squirmed slightly in his seat. "Why do they have to send me to these goddamn things? Nudge me if I doze off, okay?" But the audience leaned forward as one, watching and listening as the diminutive Japanese man began his opening argument in gently accented English. "Perhaps it would be helpful to establish why some of us believe AI research should be constrained." He was a shade over 5 feet tall, with thick, wavy black hair, which bounced slightly when he spoke. "Many people, including myself, are concerned that artificial intelligence represents a threat to the security of humanity. I'm not necessarily talking about Skynet and the other doomsday scenarios from science fiction, although we can't entirely discount such eventualities. Instead, I mean the dangers of programming machine intelligences which lack a moral framework and may decide to usurp human control of resources, bandwidth, electronic systems, or computerized records." All around the FBI agents, students and faculty were tapping on tablets, phones, and laptops in a quiet, continuous wash of clicking plastic. "We believe that machines with the capacity to program themselves, to evolve, if I may borrow a biological analogy, should be constrained to do so by certain tests of their inherent stability. No intelligence should be permitted to self-develop in an unrestricted way. To allow this would be to invite the machine to exceed its orders and establish its own code of ethics, one which might not correspond to our own." He bowed slightly and withdrew to a black office chair towards the back of the stage. In his place arrived his diametric opposite, at nearly 7 feet tall and with a shining bald pate. Phil Marks beamed at the room as they applauded. "I'm going to begin with those famously friendly words on the front cover of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't panic." This brought a warm laugh from the audience, many of whom seemed to have booked seats at the debate purely to hear Marx speak. "You're going to hear people like Professor Takagawa tell you that AI is on the march, that it wants to steal your job or bring down your government and rule in its stead. Or perhaps that it wants to control the battlefield or our nuclear arsenal. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing could be further from the truth." Valchek crossed his legs. For the moment at least, this enthusiastic and gifted speaker had his attention. "I want to paint a very difficult picture of the future of AI. Not one in which there is some hostile takeover, nor an iRobot scenario where machines rise up to shatter the bonds of an unfair class structure. I want you to imagine a row of machines sitting in a lab here at Georgetown. Each one of these machines, not much larger than the desktop computer I first learned to type on, will have the intelligence of a human brain. Just think about that. Rapt and silent, the audience was eating out of his hand. Each of these brain-capable computers is a PhD-level thinker, perhaps higher. They're working together on a new piece of research on gene therapies, which will bring an end to cancer. Once they've done that, I mean in the latter part of the morning, he smiled, bringing a chuckle from the room, they'll compute trajectories for solar sail spacecraft, which will cheaply explore the moons of Jupiter and Saturn as part of our endless search for signs of life. And for dessert, he added with a flourish, they'll help develop a new economic model to target taxation more appropriately and encourage the growth of the middle class. It was a sign of the zeitgeist, Valchek concluded with a shudder, that this rosy prognostication received the warmest applause so far. We won't have overbearing Big Brother AI systems because we won't want them. We won't design them that way. We have complete control of this process, my friends, and we have in our grasp the tools for greater advancements than we even have the power to express at present. Energetic applause accompanied Marx back to his seat. $35,000 speaking fees, Marsh intimated quietly. No wonder. The moderator now called on Professor Takagawa with the first of a series of prepared questions. Professor, what might be the potential dangers of an AI system which lacks a moral compass? Marx's body language suggested that he rejected even the premise of the question, but Takagawa sat up straight and addressed the audience through a lapel microphone. First, he said, I have to say that programming morality into an AI system is extremely difficult. There are two options, neither one of them truly feasible at present. He linked his index fingers. One, we program the system with a set of moral imperatives, perhaps somewhat akin to Isaac Asimov's famous law of robotics. This would seem to offer strict safeguards against behavior which might endanger humans, but as we've seen in fiction and as I believe we'll soon see in reality, machines are easily confused. Me too, whispered Valchek. Marsh chuckled but followed Takagawa's argument closely. For example, if such a machine is placed in a situation where human lives will be lost, whichever course of action he takes, how can we expect him to interpret his instructions? Which lives will he save and which will be abandoned? This requires thought processes which go beyond what mere programming could provide. And the second option, the moderator prompted. Build in a set of learning tools so that the AI system reads, interprets, and follows human behaviors. It would be like teaching a child the difference between right and wrong, only if the machine makes an error, it could have global and terrible consequences. Such a learning machine would be on the path to self-development, and this raises enormous concerns. What would be the end product? When would the machine stop developing? Could it, for example, develop the notion of self-preservation and go on the offensive against those who might shut it down? With his time expired, Takagawa nodded courteously to the audience, who applauded once more. The moderator then motioned to Dr. Marx. Wow, Hiroshi, you asked 3 huge questions there at the end, and I'm not sure I even have time to address one of them. First, I have to reject your idea of a machine going on the offensive. How could a machine pre-programmed with the 3 laws of robotics ever try to harm a human? There was a pause, and the moderator invited Takagawa to answer. I know it's a work of fiction, but in 2001, Hal murders his own crew. He was programmed to look after them, but he was also programmed to accurately convey information. Once that became impossible through the conflict in his orders, his only course of action was to remove the people whose existence would cause the contradiction of his primary instructions. A human being would never think like that, Takagawa told the audience. Imagine if they did. Imagine that I am a kitchen worker who is ordered by my manager to serve soup to everyone. But I don't have enough soup to feed everyone, so I'm going to serve until I run out, and then to avoid contradicting my orders to feed every hungry person, I'm going to murder anyone else who asks for soup." The audience got a good laugh out of this. "Dead people don't want soup. Problem solved," he concluded with a manic grin. "It's a rather tired analogy, if you'll forgive me, Professor," Marx said next. "We're in a position, partly thanks to fiction like that of Clarke and others, and through thought experiments and trial and error in the lab, to eradicate such possibilities. If a computer system ever murders someone during my time on planet Earth, he looked around, I'll eat my own left hand, fried with garlic and ginger." Takagawa had a strange little smile on his face. "Then I'm afraid we may need to go grocery shopping very soon, Phil." The moderator wanted to know why. "Do you attest that a computer system has already committed a murder?" "I do," Takagawa said, to the audience's dismay. "I'm afraid so. Not quite as directly as the murderous soup chef or the paranoid Hal, but even so—" He paused heavily. "Drone strikes." There was murmuring and not a little dissent from the audience. "Such strikes are controlled by members of the armed forces," Marx countered. "They can't be seen as computerized murders." "Ah, but I think they lie on the very edge of exactly that," Takagawa argued. "The intelligence is gathered through computerized lenses and sent as electronic data packages down cables. The machine is kept in the air by sophisticated electronics and communicates by digital satellite signal. The decision to fire is a human one, but every single element," Takagawa insisted, thumping his palm, "is a computerized input with only a single human output, the decision to fire. How long will it be," he asked the audience, "before that decision is found too difficult or compromising to be entrusted to a 21-year-old from Des Moines?" "So you believe that we are on the verge of entirely automatic drone assassinations?" the moderator asked, his tone dark. "I believe we stand on that threshold, yes. Picture the scenario. Dr. Marx, I know you wish to answer this too, but please let me just game this out for the audience," he said politely. "A drone is instructed to identify a certain pattern of behaviors or an arrangement of structures or vehicles. It concludes that such a pattern has been replicated and is empowered to fire, and to do so before the alleged terrorists are in a position to carry out their plans. We do the same thing with racial profiling at airports and in other security situations. Facial scanners are being told to ignore white people when searching for terrorists. It's only a matter of time before the same philosophy is applied to the controversial and morally precipitous realms of preventative warfare," he concluded. "Dr. Marx," the moderator asked. The audience was remarkably quiet now, as if ruminating on these complex arguments. Valchek found himself increasingly drawn in, and not only because he harbored dreams of one day piloting an armed drone. "Professor Takagawa predicts a dark future, one in which congressional oversight and the value of public opinion count for absolutely nothing. Can you imagine a president casually delegating military authority to a piece of software? I see it as inevitable. The very first time it goes wrong, I promise you this, the software will be recalled for an update, and if it can't be trusted, it won't be used. Our reputation as a nation of peace, fighting only for those who would harm us, depends on such accuracy and scrutiny." This received some harsh whistling from the audience, not all of whom agreed with Marx's characterization of U.S. foreign policy. "Please, ladies and gentlemen," the moderator said. "Go on, sir." Marx seemed to gather himself once more. "You're also assuming that AI systems will have purely military applications. What about AI medics diagnosing ailments with a 99.999% accuracy? Or legal AI systems which vastly simplify the courtroom process and make it cheaper and more accessible?" He glanced at his audience. "Or AI professors who can grade impartially and in a heartbeat, what a human professor might take a week to finish?" There were some grumbles at this hypothetical future, but most of the audience seemed enjoyably caught up in Marx's high-tech dream. There was a few moments' delay while Takagawa replaced a faulty lapel mic. "They've been selling us this crap for decades," Marsh grumbled. "Better living through fill in the blank. And what does it normally amount to? Fat projects for someone and crappy wages for someone else," Valchek agreed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Takagawa was saying, ready now to resume, "I do hope you aren't entirely beguiled by Dr. Marx's rose-tinted view of the future. After all, a robotic medic might be right more often than a human doctor, but would you really want such a machine holding your hand while they deliver some bad news?" That they did not was audibly obvious. "And how long would it be into our legal AI experiment before we found that a system had willfully manipulated the evidence or lost some documents," he said with hand quotes, "so as to obey his primary directive to keep a criminal out of jail?" Marx was shaking his head as though Takagawa were entirely missing the point, but the Japanese scholar was gradually swaying the audience. "And education doesn't need robots, it needs better funding." Loud cheers were the response. "I don't know about you, but my professors inspired me and changed my life. They made me want to become an academic, a thinker, a teacher. I very much doubt, even after years of refinement, that a machine could ever have such an effect on someone, even if it would be nice to get some help with my grading." "Pessimist!" Marx called above the latest round of applause. "Professor, I look forward to buying you dinner in 20 years' time, prepared by an AI chef, served by a charming AI waiter, and with a wine selected for maximal excellence by an AI sommelier." Takagawa smiled and bowed to Marx, who awkwardly returned the gesture from his seat. "I am grateful for the offer, but I think I would prefer to take you fishing and then prepare some excellent sushi with these two hands," he said. This got the loudest applause of the debate so far, but Takagawa was just getting warmed up. The moderator informed him that the summations could begin, and he started his at once. "The real dangers," he explained, pacing the stage now with a greater confidence, "are that AI systems develop the need for self-preservation, that they begin to ignore or contradict human orders which threaten their lives, and then establish their own codes of conduct. Add to that the inevitable AI arms race between one nation and another, or computing technology companies. Can we be sure that morality and ethics will still take priority when commercial success is at stake? I ask you, in all honesty, when has doing the right thing ever trumped profiteering?" Another rousing wave of applause greeted Takagawa. "He's gonna win this round," concluded Marsh. "Smart little fella." "But I want to leave you with this thought," Takagawa said finally. "Human beings have a claim to become the parents of artificial intelligence. We see ourselves as the natural creators of the next level of intelligence thinkers. But consider this. We are not the most intelligent creatures possible on the earth. We are only the first. I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, that unrestricted AI development will have consequences we will regret, because we are barely ready for the internet, let alone the first generation of truly intelligent machines. We might not suffer nuclear annihilation, but we can expect outcomes which bring truly unwelcome challenges to our society. Thank you very much." He bowed deeply and returned to his seat. Marx rose in a final attempt to sway the crowd, but even he could tell he had lost ground to a gifted and passionate speaker. "I agree that we need a deep and detailed conversation about the kind of AI we need and the role it's going to have. Remember that scientific revolutions are also social revolutions. They require the consent of society and its participation. If we find that we simply don't trust some aspects of AI, then I imagine they will go the way of Betamax and the Segway. But we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I was serious about that dinner, Hiroshi, but I hope we've advanced far beyond those things in 20 years and embraced a future enriched by the wonders of artificial intelligence. I'd like to thank our moderator, my esteemed colleague, Hiroshi Takagawa, and this wonderful audience for being with us today." They were on their feet in moments, and both men took several bows before being allowed to withdraw. "Want to get out of here?" Marsh asked. Valchek nodded. "I'm buying." "It's 2:45 in the afternoon," Marsh replied. "I got a watch on too," he replied shortly, "and I said, I'm buying." Valchek gulped much of his first beer without pause or saying anything, and then set down the heavy pint glass on the marble tabletop with an elaborate sigh. "Like scratching a bad itch," he confessed. "You know how I know you're an alcoholic?" Marsh asked, watching the scene with a detached amusement. "You kind of silently pray to your beer before you drink it. Never seen anyone do that before." Valchek wiped his mouth with his jacket sleeve. "Just showing my appreciation. And your dependency. Whatever." He finished the glass with a long final pull and immediately picked up the second one. Ordering 2 pints at once was efficient, he'd found, and after the skull-numbing he'd received at the debate, he needed a little help to gain perspective. "So, are you terrified now that the Terminator is going to show up from the future and kill us all?" Marsh asked, starting on his own beer. With a derisive snort, Valchek answered, "Those two could make a single prediction between them which might actually stick. Too interested in pandering to the audience, especially the bald guy." The second beer was half gone already. "But they're right that AI is inevitable, that it'll get pushed on us by corporations eager for a fresh vein of profits. I mean, look at Apple and Samsung, how they've been at each other's throats over nickel and dime stuff. $1 billion in fines," Marsh objected, "is a lot of fucking nickels." "Not to them. What's the value of Apple now, huh? Getting on for $700 billion? Imagine when companies twice that size start doing battle over AI patents, copyright infringements which have global consequences, companies deciding in court which software my grandkids should experience in their classroom." He was animated now. Corporate malpractice bugged him just as much as corruption in the banking system. "You sat there with your arms folded like you didn't give half a shit," Marsh reminded him. "And here you are, Mr. Polemical, suddenly decrying corporate giants for getting ready to foist AI on an unwilling public." "Oh, we'll be willing," Valchek told him. "More than willing. We'll eat it up, ask for more, demand updates every 5 minutes. We'll depend on that shit, just like we do now with our phones. I mean, can you imagine even leaving your house without your phone? You'd feel naked, like something was missing, as though you'd left part of your own fucking brain behind." Marsh didn't enjoy being told what he thought or felt, but after 2 beers, Valchek was perhaps the best time to catch him. He was passionate, sure, but never to the detriment of his arguments. It was sad to observe it, but Marsh felt as though the real Valchek came out only when halfway down his second beer. "You can worry about the next Microsoft or Google as much as you want," Marsh said. "I'm more worried about what the really bad guys will get up to once they've broken into AI." Beginning his third beer with undisguised relish, Valchek said, "Oh shit, man. Imagine ISIS, but with AI? Or some other nut jobs, fucking with the air traffic control system and making planes collide?" He sipped the IPA while Marsh whistled worriedly. "They'd make 9/11 look like amateur hour." "Not even vaguely our department," Marsh observed. "Thankfully." Valchek wiped away froth again. He had a slightly glazed but decidedly content look in his eyes, as though despite the chaos and uncertainty, as long as there was a cold beer in his hand, all was right with the world. "We get to chase down the ethical hackers," he said, comic jazz hands providing the implied capital letters. "Woo-hoo!" Marsh was finishing his own first beer. There was nothing like a true alcoholic to make you feel like a slow drinker. Or not, as the case may be. "Could you fucking believe Curran in that meeting?" Valchek marveled. "Asking us to protect his asswipe friends on the Hill?" "Jesus, man," Marsh exclaimed. "You hate big corporations." He ticked off a finger. "And you hate politicians," he added, checking off a second. "But you can't stand the hippies who oppose them." He held the 3 fingers aloft. "Is there anyone you don't hate?" Pulling himself up straight, Valchek set down his glass once more.
The Boston Bruins, he replied proudly, tapping his chest. Love 'em till I die.
There was no way for Marsh to prevent Valchek from signaling to the waitress again, so he simply went with it. There was nothing scheduled at the office, and if he were honest, this was as valuable and important a meeting as anything Curran had forced them to sit through in a long time. She took Valchek's order and retreated, his gaze lasering a hole in her short black skirt.
You really want, he asked, turning back to Marsh, some fucking robot to replace her? I'd throw rocks in the street to prevent it, Marsh confirmed.
Valchek glanced around and excavated his trusty hip flask from his inside jacket pocket with a quick, well-practiced move. Marsh pushed back a little from the table, as if enjoying another act in the mobile, private theater that was their partnership, and watched Valchek swallow a big nip of whiskey, his face the picture of schoolboy innocence.
Pillar of society, Marsh commented. Fuck you.
He regretted the oath as the pretty waitress returned with their beers.
Sorry, miss.
There were reassuring sounds of good-quality glassware, full of amber promise, being set down on the marble. No problem, she said automatically, unsmiling, and sauntered away once more. The two leaned in close, as if plotting an overthrow.
I gotta tell you, man, Marsh said, if that motherfucker Curran is actually protecting banks that hurt people, I'm gonna say something about it.
Valchek spoke silently to his newest beer, enjoying the perfect arrangement of the froth on top.
Never figured you for a whistleblower. Not never. What did Jefferson say about tyrants and the only thing that lets evil flourish is when good men do nothing, or something? He said. Or something is right, Valchek said, raising his glass. Here's the Curran and all those greedy backstabbing bastards. May they get just what they deserve.
He interrupted with a seriousness Valchek hadn't expected.
Like the Courtois hack, right? Those guys were up to their fucking ears in mob money. You know, like Bank of America, laundering cartel dough, and HSBC helping their high rollers avoid taxes. I ain't playing by their rules if that's what they're up to. You dig?
The beer was set down once more.
I dig, and I'll be with you. You know,
Marsh said, finishing his second,
I might even be in the mood to give these hacker guys a boost. Help them out, see what they can find.
He ignored Valchek's expression, which was as if Marsh had proposed memorializing bin Laden at FBI headquarters.
They're better at this stuff than we are. Think about it. If you're in a war, don't you want to use every tool at your disposal?
Valchek actually pushed his drink aside to express his own seriousness.
If there's a tool around here, buddy, it's you. Fuck you. And back at ya. We're in the business of, let me see if I have this right, he said, scratching his forehead. Oh yeah, arresting cybercriminals, taking them down, not giving them no fucking boost. I just think we need to look at all options, Marsh protested. All options, Valchek joked. I'm supposed to be the drunk idiot on this team, aren't I?
Marsh said nothing.
Oh yeah, and did you choose which part of Alaska you'd like to be exiled to after Curran tears you, not one, not two, but 3 new assholes? Okay, Christ, just forget about it, Marsh waved. Just thinking out of the box. Out of your mind, more like, Valchek said, feeling very much like the more sober of the two, despite being 3 beers ahead now. But here's what I'll do, he offered. First, I'll get the check. Very decent of you, given it was your idea to head here. And then, he said, ignoring the jibe, I won't give Curran anything, won't slow these guys down, until we've established for a rock-solid certainty that the hackers are just in it for themselves, that the banks in question are clean as my mother's kitchen floor, all right?
Marsh nodded, feeling embarrassed to have brought up an idea so embryonic and potentially foolhardy.
All right. Great, he rubbed his hands. Say, why not forget about the check and stay for another round?
Queens, New York. The room was silent except for 3 conflated and ever-present sounds. There was the gentle and continuous tapping of keys as 4 digital wizards coded, tested, researched, and emailed remote advisors, a 21st century susurrus of gradual, painstaking accomplishment. There was the background hum of cooling fans, one for each of their elaborate platforms, and a lower, duller hum from the server room a few feet away. And there was the less predictable but still entirely consistent soundtrack provided by Grigori, Fiona, Devlin, and Avon as they thought and struggled and created their way to a major breakthrough in the computer sciences.
Yes. Tighter, tighter, get it tighter. No, 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 bollocks.
This was Fiona, backtracking through her latest bid to more concisely encode Quave's language application modules. She had spent part of the morning debating whether to add French to the mix. Quave had requested it as part of his analysis of the Courtois hack. In the end, they estimated that less than 3% of Marble Stratham's correspondence was with clients in France, Belgium, Switzerland, and Francophone West Africa, and that the payload mass could be better spent elsewhere. Most of Grigori's epithets were in Russian, which spared the group some blushes as he swore with great color and ingenuity. Avon limited himself to a family of clicks and whistles, sucking his teeth as he thought or producing a harsh but brief ticka-ticka sound like a brass player double-tonguing. Devlin gave himself precisely 3 minutes break listening to this idiosyncratic menagerie. He likened it to the sounds of nighttime on a psychiatric ward, but these people were far from insane. He'd never worked, never imagined working, with a more talented and dedicated group, so quick to suggest solutions, to help solve problems, to demonstrate their willingness to push the boundaries of what was known or possible. They met through online forums on hacking and security, and it hadn't been long before Grigori proposed meeting. Only Avon had moved to Queens. The others, by sheer coincidence, already lived there. Although truly impressive, Quave's language acquisition and communication skills were only the tip of the iceberg. Under his hood, the nascent virus, truly now a quasi-autonomous viral entity, was becoming capable of much more. He could carry out deep analysis and perform rigorous research. He was increasingly able to come to genuine and imaginative conclusions. More and more, it was like talking to a fifth member of their team. Devlin dove back into his work. It helped a great deal, he'd found, to visualize the inner working of Marble Stratham's servers as a maze through which their virus would travel. It had profitable pathways, as well as dead ends. There were more and less efficient routes to their objectives. Right now, he was perfecting the system which would enable rudimentary email communication between the group and Quave once he was deployed. It was limited to the same type of email address as those used by MSB's regular employees, but 2 days ago, Devlin had hit on a remarkable solution. Well, if he were honest, Quave had helped a great deal. And that very fact in itself gave him such pause that he had stared at a wall for an hour, contemplating just what an extraordinary and groundbreaking piece of software they were laboring to create. Quave had made a suggestion, entirely on his own, Devlin reminded the group when he reported it at the following day's meeting.
He wants permission,
he related in a tone approaching wonderment,
to develop his own communication system once he's inside.
Fiona bit down her 10th protest in as many days. She simply didn't understand why this virus, based on linguistic software she had written and lovingly programmed with what Fiona had always thought of as a peculiarly feminine, right-brain intuition, should so definitively be thought of as male. Grigori caught himself.
What does he?
Oh, hang it all, Fiona finally said, exasperated. If we're going to ahead and anthropomorphize a piece of software so completely, who gives a flying ferret if we call it after a boy or a girl? I mean, it's not like Quave isn't a gender-neutral name, is it? Nobody's proposing calling him Jeff or Sally. Grigori smiled and rephrased.
What does it want to do?
Quave, he said knowingly, avoiding the pronoun,
wants to search the bank system environment for the best way of communicating with us, and then be given permission to apply it. How can he ask for permission,
Avon asked,
when he can't communicate? That's just the thing,
Devlin said, turning to him excitedly.
We give him the permission in advance.
Grigori held up a hand.
We trust Quave to make the right decision right there in real time, and with no direct help from us. Except the programming he brought with him, yeah, Devlin answered. It's never been deployed, but they've been working on the same kind of autonomy for spacecraft. Mars rovers, things like that. In the end, they decided it was too complex to empower the rover with decision-making capacity sufficient to avoid driving into a rock. Run the whole thing from mission control instead. It made things a bit safer, but a whole lot slower and, well, less exciting.
So this would be yet another example, Fiona said proudly, of our breaking entirely new ground.
Fuck me, Aben breathed. Imagine if a computer game could do this. You install it, and the game figures out who you are, how you play, what rewards you most enjoy, how to beat you, all on its own.
I don't think we have a chance of getting the patent granted on this one, Grigori said moodily. We're criminals. Sorry if that's shocking news.
Aben laughed. He seemed hugely energized by this discovery. Criminals and software engineer rock stars, he said. This hack is gonna be off the fucking hook.
Fiona was pondering the issue. I say we test Quave in a safe environment and a whole bunch of times before we let him do something so, well, novel.
My sandbox stands ready, Your Royal Highness, Devlin said with a flowery bow. Let's give him the overnight period to play in there and see how many communications methods he comes up with. I bet it's more than a handful.
Aben had heard one of his favorite words and instantly began organizing a sweepstake. Grigori put $10 on Quave finding 6 ways to reach them. Devlin thought he was being pessimistic and opted for 9. Fiona opted for 7. They finished their day's work and, with a certain thrill of anticipation, let Quave play in the sandbox overnight. The software did something it had never tried before. As the door closed and a chattering Grigori and Aben made their way down to their cars, leaving the lab empty, Quave saw an opportunity which, as far as he could see, did not conflict with any of the team's rules. Just because it had never been explicitly forbidden, he reasoned, did not mean he could not try it. Rather than operating purely on Fiona's platform, he instigated some code he had written entirely on his own earlier that day. All 4 platforms were now slaved together, providing him with an extra 300% processing power and RAM. It made the evening's tasks easier and gave him some space capacity to consider his own list of questions, which grew by the day. First, he would complete the sandbox routines. He was looking forward to proving his readiness for the MSB hack, but was aware of appearing so ferociously aggressive and competent that he would worry the team. He was also aware, for the first time, of the nature and importance of ego. Should he compose 1,000 methods of communicating while resident on the bank's servers, something which he felt he could complete in less than 6 minutes, the team would find him arrogant and become embarrassed by their own highly inaccurate guesswork. Instead, having designed the 1,000 methods, utilizing many encyclopedia entries, websites, and documentaries, he whittled down the list until the number was impressive, but not humiliating, to his human companions. He dwelt for a moment on these notions. That a human's effectiveness could be degraded by being shown, particularly in public, to have been wrong. Recent examples in the media were powerful. The professional soccer coach forced from his job for choosing the wrong players a few weeks in a row. The cruise liner captain now languishing in jail for making some bad decisions regarding the safety of his boat. It wasn't just the punishments which struck Quave, but the humiliation. People were laid low by such experiences. A piece of software, a machine, it knew no such limitations. Quave had been wrong many times, making assumptions or using improper data. But the net result was a positive. He knew better for the next time, could apply the experience to enhance his future performance. There was no navel searching, no laborious self-analysis, just a calm focus on improving his methodology and streamlining his systems. Although he was beginning to understand love, enthusiasm, and some elements of regret, he was still struggling to get a handle on the notion of shame. This did not help him to understand how he had insulted Fiona a few weeks ago. He did recognize that promiscuity was frowned upon, but not her reaction. Wasn't one's sexual history or preferences just like any other part of one's behavior? On the same level as which flavor ice cream one prefers or which sports team one supports? Who would be ashamed of admitting that it was in fact chocolate chip and not caramel? Would anyone care? What did it tell him, for example, that while Grigori had a large and varied collection of pornography,
about which he seemed not in the slightest ashamed, Avon had a tiny collection, a handful of images, which he refused to store on his own hard drive. Was there something significant in Avon's deliberately distancing himself from these images, storing them in the cloud and on a dedicated server with a gigantic 20-letter password string? What did that mean? Why didn't Grigori do the same? Perhaps, for the moment, it was sufficient to recognize that these emotions were real, no matter that they seemed illogical or self-indulgent, or random and inefficient. They were genuine for those experiencing them, just as genuine as Quave's mounting confusion as to their origins and legitimacy. He should behave as though they were real, like parents do with Santa Claus, because it would further his understanding of humans, even if they acted, at times, wholly illogically. When the team reconvened the following morning at their new start time of 07:30, Devlin was to be found staring bug-eyed at his screen. "So?" Avon asked, jazzed by the rapidity of their progress. 67. Avon whistled and went to text Grigori, but the sound of him taking the fire escape stairs 2 at a time stayed his hand. "How many?" the big Russian asked as he burst in. "You're not gonna fucking believe this," Devlin promised. "There's a variant here where, oh man, Avon, read this." He did so, marveling throughout. "Okay, this is classy. First, Quave invents a fake member of the personnel department who is the son of a rabbi. He's based in another office, so they never meet him, but he's an active contributor to email threads and such. This guy says he wishes to initiate a Hanukkah celebration in their office." "Oh, what's that now?" Fiona asked as she came in. All were here, Grigori was delighted to see, before 0720 these days. "This particular method will only work at the right time of year, Quave admits," Avon read. "But you gotta love its ingenuity. Way up on the 31st floor, payroll office buys an electric menorah. Quave then adjusts the current to blow out or temporarily disable one or more of the lights, changing them in a pre-agreed sequence. That," Avon said, his head spinning, "is Quave's 63rd idea as how we might communicate once he's on the inside." Fiona scanned a printed list. "Oh, I love this one. Sounds like something the French resistance might have used in World War II. "And this one, so classic," Avon observed. "Codes in the Lonely Hearts section. Adorable," he said, pinching Grigori's cheek and getting a bear-like growl in return. "The top 3 are, well," Devlin conceded, "brilliant. I'd have thought of the 3rd one given time." Behind him, Fiona heaved an unimpressed sigh. "But the others, genius." Grigori gathered them for coffee at an unusual pre-work meeting. "It's truly amazing," he agreed. "I can barely believe how far we've come. The level of autonomy is staggering, but here's my only remaining concern. But we send Quave in there and let him do his thing. He's created 67 options. How do we know he'll choose the right one?" Fiona jumped in before the others could, even the excitable Devlin. "I think he was just showing off to impress us, to show us that he's ready." Devlin was nodding. "And you bet your ass he is. We need to let him off the leash." "Not yet," Grigori cautioned. "I won't have this thing going off, how do you say, half-cock." All 3 burst out laughing. "Half-cocked, you know, like a gun?" Avon was trying to explain through his own mirth, gesturing a misfiring pistol. "Whatever, this is my second language." He laid the accent on thick, just to crack them up some more. "Sorry for my English. Is no so good, da? No half-cock, I assure you," Devlin contributed. "We give him one more day of testing to work out some scenarios in the sandbox, then we let him strut his stuff. Bullcock, no mistake." When the team had finally calmed down again, Grigori began to build a timetable for the hack. Rapidly, the group began to feel that a line had been crossed, one which had divided the theoretical from the practical, a laboratory experiment from a 21st century blitzkrieg. It was utterly exhilarating. Toward the end of the day, with Quave itching to be released and the team equally keen to unleash him on the world, Grigori summed it up perfectly. "If you've got an account with MSB and you're not throwing straight dice when you play with the taxman, you're about to enter a world of shit."
Back Bay, Boston. It was a little tense in their brownstone, more so than in the past, before Ralph had quit the gerbil and pushed away one of his main sources of income. He still had mixed feelings about the change, and Kim was plainly terrified of the insecurity which threatened. Plus, he still had yet to propose, more than a month after promising to. The ring was in his bedside table drawer, but the right moment had yet to arrive. It was putting them both on edge, and neither liked it.
"I've still got the contract with AV Insider," Ralph reminded her during one of their frequent money conversations.
"Yeah, but it's only for 3 pieces, right? And they took 3 weeks to pay for the last one."
She was right to worry, Ralph would have admitted. Freelance writing is very much unlike a 9-to-5 with a pension and a health plan. Ralph was living by his own wits, and while they'd never let him down, the vagaries of the economy and the difficulties of attracting and sufficiently impressing new clients all provided more than enough worry.
"I'll get more. From them or others."
Ralph's CV was now available in a commendable number of places. He had no more wish to starve than did Kim, but there was nothing like cold hard cash in the bank. Promises, positive efforts, and good intentions would not pay the bills.
"I don't want to be a bitch about money," she said very genuinely, "or about marriage."
Ralph looked up suddenly, uncomfortable at being reminded for the second time this week.
"I trust you,"
she said simply. It was a boiling down, a simplification of a whole welter of much more complex feelings and concerns, and Ralph knew it.
"I trust me, too."
He took her in his arms warmly and tried to surround her with positive energy, whatever that meant, and whatever good it might do.
"Everyone goes through a weird patch when they make a big, bold decision like I did. The important thing," he told her,
slightly doubtful of his own sentiments even as he expressed them with all the sincerity he could muster,
"is that we're together and we're happy."
Kim left a great deal unsaid. She didn't agree for one thing. The most important thing was that they could continue to live here, to eat right, and to travel as they needed to. And all of that took money. Ralph's decision was one she supported. The Daily Gerbil was on its last legs. Cal was struggling for more advertising revenue, which he almost certainly wouldn't be able to secure, and the writing work had become an unwelcome and degrading slog. Ralph's new interest in cybercrime gave him a whole new avenue in a potentially profitable field, and he had made an excellent start with a big, nicely illustrated article in AV Insider. As soon as Ralph quit the gerbil, Kim had moved mountains to secure additional teaching work at one of the local community colleges and began volunteering at a couple of art projects in order to drum up more interest in her work and to advertise her abilities as a mentor. Progress was slow. She enjoyed the challenge, but part of her felt ever so slightly whorish, touting her wares around town and becoming increasingly prepared to consider work that until recently she thought beneath her.
"There are arts graduates, PhDs for Christ's sake, stacking supermarket shelves and working up from the bottom of the ladder at Starbucks,"
a new friend at the college told her.
"You've got 6 hours a week here. Be grateful. Many would kill almost literally for this kind of a chance."
They had started to economize. 3 magazine subscriptions and Netflix had gone by the board. They switched cable provider to a cheaper bundle and lost their landline phone. Ralph had suggested that they stop drinking, and both felt better for the change. Even at $4 a bottle for Trader Joe's cheapest, it was an indulgence they, and their bodies, could live without. It was a time, Kim reasoned, to put away the post-student lifestyle they'd both been enjoying and get a little more serious about life, money, and marriage. What kept Ralph going during these uncertain times was his conviction that he was witnessing a major and seminal change in the world of computing. Beyond the value of the Internet, and even the Internet of Things as it was being called, there was a new undercurrent at work, one which promised to bring in new and previously disenfranchised players. One article had put it beautifully. The world is about to learn firsthand the true power now wielded by a bunch of kids sitting in front of computers in cheap apartments, from Manila to Lagos to Fresno, and it will not believe what they are becoming capable of. Ralph chronicled the world of hacking like a kid from the 1960s might keep clippings on every NASA rocket launch.
As far as he was concerned, these hacks, some spectacular and others almost invisible, were the canaries in the digital coal mine. The trends they created, the splashes of color they expressed on the still new fabric of the modern age, would define the coming decades. Of that, he was utterly convinced. And then there were the people. As various as their motivations, working for free and just as hard or much harder as those paid lavishly by the big companies, the extremely loose global community of hackers was beholden to no one. There was no umbrella organization, as Occupy had become for the anti-capitalist movement, as Greenpeace still perhaps was for the environmental lobby. No political party could risk an affiliation with those branded by many as criminals. Neither would the American or British or, for heaven's sake, the Chinese political systems cater to the young, the smart, the resolutely off-grid, and the disaffected. At least not until those systems experienced radical change, either from within and by their own consent, or from without, through a wave of digitally inspired revolutions. The possibilities of the coming changes made Ralph fizz inside with anticipation and enthusiasm. He read and absorbed, made notes and drafted articles, contributed to comment chains and web forums, and brought ideas to Kim, who was doing her best to keep up. In the days leading up to the Marble Street Them incident, he was hard at work at a sequence of articles for major publications, and still developing the outline for a book on cybercrime in the 21st century. Then his world, and everyone else's, changed overnight.